Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming to the Amherst Police Department and Community Responder, or CRESS, Joint Public Forum. We're here tonight with Captain Gabriel Ting and Mr. Earl Miller of the CRESS Department. We're going to talk a little bit about what each department does, what their role is in regards to public safety here in Amherst, and more importantly, how we're both working together to make Amherst a safer and more inclusive community for all. We'll start with a very brief overview of each department, and then there'll be plenty of time for question and answers after. And I'll just give a brief hello from our town manager, Mr. Paul Bockelman.
I'm Paul Bockelman, town manager. Thank you all for being here. I'm only here because I've heard so much about Earl. I don't know about you guys, but I've heard so much about him. I want to recognize Councilor DeAngelis, who's here, and thank you for your time. And all the other people, we'll have other recognitions in a minute. Anna is here as well. Thank you, Anna. Didn't sneak in there. So we're really excited. I really want to thank Haley for putting this together. It's her idea to sort of help the community learn more about what our public safety system is starting to look like. And so thank you all for being here.
Take it away, you two. Thank you.
You want to start first?
Sure. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Gabriel Ting, is my formal name, but obviously I go by Gabe. I'm a captain with the Amherst Police Department. I've been there for 25 years now. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Amherst. My family came here when I was about 5 years old from Argentina, where I was born. My father was an engineer and did a lot of traveling, and we ended up settling in this area. My mother worked for the university, and she just retired last year. She had been there for about 40 years or so. So that's what had brought us into the area. And I went through the Amherst school systems. From there I went on and graduated from UMass, and then I went on to get my master's degree. I have an older brother and sister. My older brother was also a policeman, and all three of us went through the university and all through the Amherst school system. So I'm very proud to be employed by the town of Amherst and to be able to give something back to a community that's given myself and my family so much. I do see some familiar faces in here. My old football coach is sitting in the back there, Mr. Wiley. So that's always really nice to see. So a little bit about the police department. You know, currently we have 42 officers. Right now we have 3 officers in the police academy that just started this past week. You know, our police department's a little bit unique. I say that simply because our community is very unique. When I take a look and compare our police department to other police departments in the area, you know, we're very different. We have, you know, not only a college town, but we also have permanent residents. It's a very transient community. You get a little bit of everything. You know, our mantra in the police department is that if you can work in the Amherst Police Department, you can generally work anywhere because you get a taste of all sorts of different facets of life and experiences. So our police officers are very experienced in that sense. What else? What else do you want to know about the police department? Just a few common misconceptions that people get confused with. The university, they have a pretty large police department. They have about 60 officers. Amherst College has about a dozen officers. And Hampshire College used to have a police department. So within the town of Amherst, there were quite a few officers in town. However, there's always the belief that, you know, why can't we share each other's officers and utilize each other's officers? And there's a lot of reasons behind why that doesn't work. That's not to say that we don't collaborate with each department. We do, very much so. But the university polices their campus, and we police our town. With that being said, we have tried joint patrols before, and it has worked at some levels, but at other levels it hasn't. There's been some issues with that in terms of philosophy and in terms of unions that unfortunately get in the way. So with that being said, you know, our police department is very progressive. You know, we really focus on training and finding the best officers that we can find out there. I'm going to kick it over to Earl. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me? I can't hear myself through the speakers, so sometimes I feel like I'm, okay, cool. I just want to acknowledge the other leg of public safety that's not here today, the fire department. Chief Nelson and Chief Livingstone have both been incredible ambassadors to me. They've taken time out of their very busy lives to talk to me, not just about the work, and just so you know, I think about the work a whole bunch, but to talk to me about what it's like to sit in that seat. This is a fairly unique perspective I'm having right now, and I really try to appreciate that, right? So while those folks aren't here, they are in spirit. CRESS, Community Responders for Equity, Safety, and Service. It doesn't roll off the tongue the first time, but you'll get there, don't worry. We are an unarmed response to challenges in the community. And I think there's a million ways to define that, but what I'm learning these days is I don't want to prescribe solutions before I know what the challenges are. And that's a potential pratfall. And just so you know, the last time there was a new public safety department in this town, there were horse and buggies on these streets. It was a very long time ago. So it's not like I can find those folks and ask them how they did it. What I've learned is, we're asking people what are their challenges and solving problems. So a little bit about me, I am somebody who, I come from a not so great family. I don't have those sorts of supports. It's one of the things I really love about this town, right? I don't necessarily feel envious of people who have that, because I never had it, right? It's hard to miss things you don't have. But it's great to see the families in here. I'll tell you, yesterday afternoon I got to chase a baby around a house for a little bit, so the mom could talk about some things she was facing, and it felt like, how often in life do you get to be in someone's house just spending time with their children, and they can trust you with that? It's a really meaningful space. What we know is that there are some mental health challenges in this community that are unmet, either through existing providers not having enough space for folks, or frankly, the limits of traditional services, right? Some people's mental health challenges are easily addressed by going to a therapist weekly or monthly. Some people it's not. Some people need someone who can show up when they need them. For homeless folks in this community, sometimes when we think of homeless folks, we only see them on their worst days, right? I was homeless. When I was 21, I lived in Forest Park. I didn't look as put together, I don't look as put together as this guy, but I didn't look as put together as I managed to be today. What I was lacking wasn't necessarily a home, it was compassion, right? I didn't have anybody who could really see me. And so I'm telling you a long story of saying a lot of the problems we're thinking about solving our problems that I've had myself. I've spent time in long-term hospitals. I was not necessarily the best student, don't ask, because it's probably worse than that. I'm somebody who my life is kind of, somebody asked me like a week ago, how did I end up here? And I said, I'm not quite sure. I feel a little like the story of, is it Moses? I got thrown into a river and I'm in Amherst. And somehow the river just kind of led here. I worked in peer support in Springfield for the Wildflower Alliance now, and there I ran a center where lots of homeless folks came, and really folks who didn't have a lot of resources. We didn't have a lot of resources as a program. We could not afford to solve people's problems with money, but we could love them. We could care deeply about them. And I think you'd be surprised how many problems that at least starts to solve. I started a housing program called Finding Shelter through Peer Support in Springfield. We were able to house over 100 people. We provided wraparound services at a building there, which was the first time that service had been delivered by a non-clinical agency. And the way we did it was by being loving and addressing issues kind of as they showed up. Then I decided I wanted to be a bureaucrat for a while, so I went to the state. That was interesting. Learned some things. And I worked for the Department of Mental Health for 4 years as the Director of Recovery, really trying to look at programs and how do you keep them human when the staff are underpaid and overworked and the challenges the folks face are massive. How do you still kind of show up for those folks every day? And I don't know that I solved that problem by the time I left there, but I thought about it every day and I moved, right? One foot in front of the other. And CRESS is, I did not think I was going to be leaving the state. I certainly didn't think I was going to be leaving it to be a department of one for almost 3 months. But But I watched the process this town had, and one of the great things about CRESS is that while I get to hold this baby, it is Amherst's baby, right? This is this town's answer to a question that very few communities even got past the point of asking. What if the police don't serve every need we have? What if the fire department doesn't serve every need we have? And that's not a detriment to the gentleman to my side, right? For too long in this country, every social problem has been dumped off on law enforcement. That's not fair to them. They didn't sign up for that either. The resources to solve those problems didn't follow the ask to do it. So CRESS is a unique thing. We are a public safety department in the town. Our folks have union jobs. God willing, one of them will get a pension from this place. I'm looking forward to, I'm hoping maybe it's me. Although I got a while, I'm hoping maybe it's me. We had an opportunity here to not look at these people in terms of what's already existed, but to say, who would we hire if we didn't have the constraints of what already exists? We don't need to hire police. We have a police department I believe in. Are they perfect? No, we won't be perfect either. Sorry to say that. If anybody came here thinking I was gonna tell you we were gonna be perfect, I'm sorry, we weren't ever gonna be perfect. But we can put one foot in front of the other and solve the problems that show up. We've got 8 people coming into training on July 5th. I'm gonna stand these folks in front of the same room on July 5th, and I'll put everything I got behind them. I believe in these folks. Just like this gentleman, most of them are sons and daughters of this place. This is a special place, right? It's a special place when the people who are looking out for your safety have this place under their fingernails. That's different. That's an opportunity, right? One of the opportunities here is that generally when communities have gone this way, it's because they no longer trust their police department. They no longer trust their public safety offices. Our opportunity here is, can you do this in a place where the PD is still working for folks? And there are lots of folks in this community who are afraid of CRESS, not because they think we'll fail, but because they think when they call the police, they won't show up. And I just, I don't want to spoil the rest of this talk, but that's not going to happen. We're committed to being the third leg of public safety. If your house catches on fire, I promise not to show up with a bucket of water, right? The right folks are going to show up for the right reasons. And so CRESS, it's hard for me to tell you what it's going to be because every Friday, kind of what I've been saying is every Friday I would describe CRESS a little bit differently. Some Fridays I'd say we're going to be a mental health program. Like the mental health needs in this community are so vast that we may chase that for, 40 hours a week and find that we still don't have enough time. Sometimes I think we're going to be a grief agency. There's a lot of unprocessed grief from the last 2 years in this community. There are a lot of people who haven't finished mourning what the last 2 years meant to them. And some days I think we're going to end up being at the schools every day, and that might be true too. I like kids, and we have good teachers and folks who need someone to stand and help them, right? Not to supplant them, but to tell them that how to be helpful. How can we be other adults who are supporting you? So I appreciate this community letting me hold its baby. And a baby that belongs as much to the police department and the fire department as anybody. Chief Nelson is writing grants for us. The police department is going to work on our vehicles. We have an implementation committee. That means every Thursday. They're there every Thursday. They're figuring out radios. This is a team effort. And the only thing that can break us is if we let any of this divide us, right? There is no way for CRESS to work in a community that's fighting itself. So, I don't know. I do talk about this a lot. I do talk about this basically every hour of every day.
If I could just add.
Please.
So, we believe that, our police department's a part of this community. All of our officers, we try to integrate our officers into the community. When this whole CRESS program came about, obviously there were a lot of unknowns, a lot of questions. And from the police department's point of view, we didn't see that as a finger point at the police department. We saw that there's a problem. It's nationwide, it's statewide, it's local. And we try to figure out, okay, what's a solution for that problem? And the community spoke. We have to listen to the community. After all, we do work for the community. We work with the community, and we believe that we're a part of that community. So when there's voices out there that are saying, hey, there could be a better way, we have to listen. We pride ourselves on being extremely progressive and being open-minded. So when that CRESS program started developing, and certainly when Earl was hired, the first conversation I had with Earl was asking him, what are your expectations, coming into Amherst? And first and foremost, because this program is so new, there's really no models to follow anywhere in this country. Earl basically said, listen, my goal is to be a part of the community. Simple as that. If you can become a part of the community, you learn all the ins and outs of what's going on in the community, who lives in this community, and what the issues are. And collaboratively with the fire department and all the other town entities, we can all put our heads together. This isn't a CRESS problem. This isn't a police department problem or a fire department problem. It's the problems that we have are shared community-wide. And that's kind of the collaboration that we have, and I'm extremely proud of that.
It's important to think about how many communities started down this road and didn't make it. A lot of communities started this conversation and didn't. And if you ever want an epic viewing, watch those CSWG meetings from the beginning to the end. Whenever I run into those folks, my question is, why didn't you quit? Why didn't this town quit? There were meetings where I'm like, man, you guys should probably quit, right? This is hard, right? Talking about the history of racism in this country is hard. Talking about the history of law enforcement in this country, even if you separate the context that this police department doesn't operate in some ways that other police departments do, right? You aren't seeing people aren't dying when they run across the Amherst PD, right? And maybe that's a low bar, but there are parts of this community where that bar is not always clear, right? You have Chief Livingstone, who's been here for how long?
Yeah, 40 years.
Loves the place, right? I met with him the first time, I kind of expected like a scary cop meeting, right? And I was all prepared for it. I wore my tough boy shirt. I had a Red Bull. I was ready. And what he said to me was like, "Hey, if you're gonna come here, you gotta come here, right? You gotta respect what we do here. You gotta respect this community." And I believed that before I got here, and hearing it from him was important. So many communities started down this conversation, and my working thesis on why it happened in this community is because you were willing to have the battles. You were willing to have those conversations, and you were willing to push past even if you couldn't agree, right? That's really hard to do, to fund a department and go, hey, there are parts of this that I want to work this way, and Gabe thinks it should work a different way, and let's let it go out in the wash. Let's let the work tell us what's supposed to happen. This is a brave community that has done brave things before, and I'm asking you to be brave again. Because when we start, part of when I think of the work at CRESS, I think of it as art, right? And when I think of social work, what has stopped working in social work is that it has stopped being an art. It's become about paperwork. It's become about billing. It's become about all the things outside of me and a person sitting in a room and figuring it out together. And we're gonna be artists, right? Art is messy, right? Art takes time, but art lasts, right? Art lasts. And so, so thank you all for the opportunity. And this partnership is real. So we've done tabletop exercises where we've sat in a room together and pondered some really hard things. What's CRESS gonna look like day one versus a year from then, versus 5 years from then? I think anywhere past that, none of us can imagine, right? That is outside of the realm of who knows what. What resources can we share? What does it look like for us to be a part of the same challenge? How can we let our egos go to the side so that we can solve the issue? And there are egos, we're human beings, right? This guy wore a suit. I didn't wear a suit. A little part of me goes, man, if you'd have told me we were wearing ties, I'd have put a tie on. But how do you put that stuff aside on a day-to-day basis to do the work? And I don't know yet, but what I know is that the leadership of these departments and the fire department and dispatch are all committed to doing that. And part of this is there's a lot of communities watching us. And some of them are watching us saying, maybe they'll show us how to do it. And probably a few of them are watching us to see us fail. And they're going to be disappointed. They're going to be disappointed because we're gonna figure it out. Because we're willing to do the hard stuff. This is a brave community. So.
And that's the truth. The starting point is that there's no barriers at all. There's no barriers between us. There's no barriers between what we're trying to accomplish. We have one mission, one goal at hand. And when you don't have any barriers in front of you, you really have a really strong foundation. And so far we have that. We could both agree that, we don't know what this is gonna look like. We have no idea. It's gonna be a work in progress. When I talk about the fire department, we've been working together for, I don't know how long. So for us, it's like clockwork, second nature. With CRESS, we don't know how that's gonna work, but I do know it's gonna be positive. I do know that it's gonna be successful, guarantee that. Very confident there. It's just in terms of growing pains, how's that gonna shape?
And we're not gonna be perfect, right? The thing here is not to put Band-Aids on so we feel better, but to solve problems in sustainable ways. And what I've said at all these meetings is, you all have work to do too, right? That's the whole part of public safety is, we show up on the worst day of folks' lives. That's the reality of what we're undertaking, right? Nobody calls 911 because things are going well. Nobody calls the municipal government into their home because, hey, I'm having a party, I'll invite them all over. Things are rough, right? And we will do our best in those worst days of people's lives to hold them together. But if you don't hold them after that, we'll just circle that worst day of their life. I'm loud, I'm loud enough, I don't need it, yeah.
Yeah, you might be good.
But if we're gonna hold people on this worst day of their life, it only works if when they come back to you, if they come back from the hospital or jail or wherever they end up, if this community embraces them. Because if you don't, we keep chasing that worst day of their life forever. So I think when people see us up here, just know that there's a seat for you. There's a seat for this community here. And if all of us don't see this as our mission to move forward, we're gonna be in trouble, right? With CRESS, I think we have two mottos right now. The first one is, we're building the plane as we fly it. Chief Nelson, who, if you know him, flies planes, told that to every applicant who we interviewed. We are building this plane as we fly it. So there are gonna be parts of it that we think are gonna look this way, and if the work tells us they need to look this way, the work's right. But the other part is one foot in front of the other, right? I don't know what 6 months from now looks like, but I can tell you that tomorrow I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna do my absolute best all day. Kat Newman, our new program assistant, is gonna do her absolute best every single day. The PD is gonna do their best. And if we do that every day, we'll build good habits, we'll build good patterns, we'll build a good rapport, we'll build something meaningful. But it all matters what you do every day, right? And that's what we're trying to be the best at, is every day. If you're worried about effort, I got into town at about 7:30 this morning. I'll leave after this and I'll be back here tomorrow. We're driving a kid back and forth to school because the family's having some issues. That's a solvable issue for us. Can't do that forever. The community's gonna have to step in and figure that out, right? The school's gonna have to do that. But for this week, well, we get to spend time with a lovely family, right? Life ain't so bad. That's what we're doing here. So, I don't know, I could talk about this forever, and Gabe was on my hiring committee, so if you like me or don't like me, you should also blame him. He was part of that decision. And I just want you to know, that during my interview, they asked tough questions, which they should do, right? Your government, if they're inviting people to come into your town, should ask them hard questions before it pays them. That's a default, right? And they asked me how I felt about police, and the reality is that I have had police who have mistreated me, and I have police who've been kind to me. You are gonna find with CRESS that there's gonna be a lot of programs like this around the country. Some of them are gonna be fantastic, and some of them are gonna do bad things. That's the nature of humanity. And I ask you to judge us by the work we do here with you, because I don't have any control of those folks. And similarly, there are gonna be other law enforcement agencies that are gonna make decisions. Judge our folks by them, right? And good or bad, right? Give us a chance. Give this collaboration a chance, because it's yours. And if you were paying us and we weren't talking to each other, you should be pretty upset, right? This is what we're supposed to do. So I don't know, I'd love to hear if you folks have questions or thoughts or, yeah.
You said there should be a third chair there, and it should be the community. So one of the things I'm trying to understand is how will we, as a town councilor, how will we get information about this child who you're taking to school right now? Because you can't keep doing it. How do we communicate so that we can make decisions and we can affect,
Yeah,
I think you know what I'm
affect
trying to
change.
say, both of you. You know, how do we get the information that we need as a community so we can be part of the solution?
Yeah.
And that it isn't all resting on you,
Yeah.
which
So-
makes it easy for the rest of us.
Yeah, so that scenario is actually a really interesting one for us to talk about, because we were invited to that by a patrol officer, right? There was an incident, he didn't know quite what to do, the school was struggling a little bit, and they figured, well, CRESS doesn't know, you know, we don't know what they are, let's see if we bring them in, if they solve it, or what they do. So the school's been really helpful. The school is already working to bring community folks in. Some of what we're doing here is just kind of holding it together until they can get their pieces in, right? It's the end of the school year. They're really busy. They have some pieces that they can play when the school year ends that we're just holding the line for. We're looking at the ways in which we take in data. Some of it is going to be quantitative, right? The number of people we see, the number of 911 calls we take, although if we do our work well, we will prevent some 911 calls. So don't get too caught up in that 911 number, because if that number is low, it might mean we're doing okay. But also the qualitative. We're gonna ask those folks to tell their story when they feel comfortable, right? When we get them to the other side, can you tell us what about us supporting you made things feel better? What about what we did was helpful? What about it wasn't helpful? Was there a piece of it that didn't work? And collecting those stories. The other piece is encouraging folks to come talk to you. We're building this in the daylight. That's the beautiful opportunity here, is to build this in the daylight. We're gonna be training at the Munson Library. We're not disappearing. We're gonna do that here with you all. Come see us. Like, we wanna build this in front of you all. We wanna do our work in front of you all. So seeing people and all those things are gonna happen in front of you. But if I think Amherst Neighbors is a great example, right? Those folks reached out my first day. I heard from someone from the neighbors. When I have reached out to members of that group about challenges, they've addressed them, and they've addressed them so smoothly that when I call to find out what happened, situation's done. There is no follow-up. The person's being loved by his neighbors. They don't need me anymore, right? That's the sort of things, but we can talk to you too. You know, I intend to be saying this to folks all the time, and when issues arise that have specific action steps, coming back to you and saying this is where we are and what we need. I'll tell you, one of the things we need right now is to start kind of learning about mental health as a community, learning about what that is. Because one of the things about that is I think we've all been through a trauma in the last 2 years. I think we are all in a different place than we were at the beginning of 2020. And how do we address that? Because there are some folks who are doing okay. Trauma's a tricky thing. Sandra describes it as the 3 E's, right? It's an event. We've all been through the event. That is experienced as traumatic. I don't know anybody that hasn't had a traumatic experience in the last 2 years, or a couple. But it's the effect. Now this trauma is gonna show up for decades. Some people aren't gonna feel what happened for the last 2 years for 10 years from now. They're gonna be walking around thinking things are fine and then it won't be. And how do we support them then in building up that kind of, and how do we be compassionate to people who are doing things that it's hard to be compassionate to? So my commitment is to always be talking to you and to ask you for help when I need it, the same way I go over to them. If I need something, I can walk into the doors of the PD and be in one of their offices and address it with them. And to treat you all like a chair up here, like your department up here, and to figure out what you care about and what you do well and bring your talents to bear just like ours. It's gotta be a team effort, all of us.
Just to further answer your question, Pat, you know, during our implementation process, we had spoken quite extensively in terms of data, in terms of compiling that data, so we can show the public, you know, what type of issues we're dealing with, you know, what type of calls, what are the solutions and whatnot. Because again, Earl has touched upon this quite a bit. He said, you know, the first year, we don't know what it's going to look like, and it's certainly going to look different in year 2 compared to year 1, because by then, we're going to hone in on, you know, where the problem areas are and kind of get situated. So those statistics, I don't think you can really rely on year 1. You know, I would project it out to more like 3 to 5 years to start getting an accurate picture.
And it's not statistics I'm thinking about.
How do we bring you to the table?
Yeah, so that I'm helpful, so that the council is actually helpful, that my friend Peter is helpful, the survival. So one of the things that happened ages ago is a couple of us came and visited the police department. And then we found out that meant a lot to you guys.
Sure did.
And it meant a lot to me. But that, I think we need that somehow on a regular basis. Not the statistics, but the human element of it, the relationship of it. And municipal government doesn't do that, but I think that's what we need to do. So that we're involved in some of the solutions with the people who need help.
I'm a real human service nerd. You'll learn that about me. There's a modality in Europe called open dialogue that I believe in really passionately. And it's this idea that when someone's going through a crisis, right? A crisis of faith, a crisis of whatever. The solution that we have, the kind of Western solution, is to remove that person from their community, fix them, and then kind of bring them back. Open dialogue is you bring their family and their community to them in that crisis. You're gonna see us do things that come out of that. Wellness recovery action plans, asking a person, how do they wanna be treated when they're in crisis? What's helpful, what's not helpful, before the crisis starts. We've extended this off for lots of folks, and I extend it again to you. If you know someone who is likely to end up needing a 911 call, they have a mental health challenge that sometimes kind of flares up, maybe they have a substance use challenge that may become an issue, you're concerned about them, let us meet them before we get there. Let us meet them before it's the worst day of their life. Let's plan on how we can be helpful. Hey, when we show up, who do you need to show up? Would it be helpful if it was a woman who showed up? Would it be helpful? What's your trauma history and how do we not re-traumatize you? We're gonna have to learn how to re-talk to each other about these things. This only works if we're willing to show each other our soft spots, right? The last few years have really hardened us all up, right? Protect yourself, the world is everywhere. But this is only gonna be possible if we're able to be vulnerable with each other and then to hold that vulnerability. So there are a lot of modalities we're looking at bringing in, but really all to serve the same purpose of when someone is challenged, how do we bring the strength of this community to bear, the beauty of this community, right? One of the reasons I chose the Munson Library is those people we're training are gonna have some bad days. It's gonna be an intense training. It's gonna be a lot of classroom days. It's gonna be hard. I know it's gonna be hard. I'm designing it. It could be hard, right? But they can go out there and look at the valley, right? They can look outside of that building and see that, like, this is a beautiful place. You get to do hard work in a gorgeous space. I want to take some of the folks who don't get to see in those spaces all the time and bring them there, right? What does it look like to talk about crisis in a beautiful place? To go sit somewhere and also realize that, like, all those flaws are part of the beauty of this town, right? The mentally ill are artists, there are muses, right? Those folks have value here. And even when people are at their weakest, how do we still see them as full community members? I don't have a good answer for that yet. But I think that we need to keep talking about that, and we need to keep pushing ourselves. And you know, part of our responsibility is to lead the way, to be compassionate, and when it works, you know, to ask you to join in with us. So that's a good question, and the answer is to be determined. Oh, yeah. Oh, please.
Yes, I have a couple of questions, but the first one I wanted to ask is when I look at, you know, how policing is done, when somebody calls 911, it goes to a dispatch and not the police department. So how will the community actually be able to connect with CRESS?
Yeah, so through dispatch, Mike Curtin has been a part of this process since it started. He's the dispatch lead. He's a great guy. He doesn't get to leave that office so much because they're taking calls, and so he's kind of in that work. So they'll take calls. They are already, when calls are coming in, looking at whether or not they would flag them for CRESS. The PD, when they're showing up to calls, they're now starting to ask themselves, hey, if CRESS was around, would we have sent CRESS instead of us? Fire department too. That's one way. We'll also have a direct number. So we will have a number that folks can just call, just to speak to us. If you don't have my card yet, you will. I'll make sure you get it before you go today. Also, just reach out directly. Part of these programs are often in big towns, big cities, where you don't get to do some of this stuff. is we can come to your kitchen table. Like, we can come sit at your kitchen table and talk about a challenge. That's an opportunity that nobody in my role has ever had. So, yeah. But also, we're getting these from, we're meeting folks kind of where they are. We're out during the day, so sometimes, we're at the school, we'll meet a family that's there because they're dealing with something and just kind of have a side conversation. Our goal is really to be kind of everywhere as much as possible. And I don't mean that there'll be 100 of us, but at least to be an active part of the community so that when folks are thinking about challenges that folks are facing, you might suggest to someone that they reach out to us. We'll be here in this building. You can send someone over to the building. We want to give as many ways as possible. Yes, sir?
When you say you're at the school, which, is it one school in particular, or is it at schools in general?
We started with the high school, because obviously they've had a bit of a year. And also to live, their principal really welcomed me in immediately. And I can't say enough good things about that human being with the challenge of his job. The middle school, yeah, so we're showing up when there are things. So me and Kat were at graduation rehearsal the other day, just to be some additional adults, just to be another support. And that's an emotional time, right? And remembering too that these kids did not have a normal high school experience, right? There were years of this that was taken from them. Fairly or unfairly was taken from them. We've gone to the middle school. I chaperoned the middle school dance. I see it might be, it was a tricky spot, and actually today we went to the 8th grade field trip to Look Park for a couple hours and watched the river go by. So not a bad way to spend the day.
We're on the playground at Crocker Farm.
Yeah, and Crocker Farm invited us. The other schools were kind of waiting for their school year to die down. They didn't really have much space because they're running full board. It's really been when they've had space or they've had an issue that's shown up. We will be meeting with all the administration over the summer, and then we're going to be at welcome back nights for parents to start next school year, because we want to meet parents too. We want them to know what we're there for. I don't quite have a great solution to that. Part of that is I don't want to even think about a solution without having conversations with the schools and with as many parents as I can about how they see our role looking like, what the challenges they perceive are. Then also having conversations with the other public safety folks. Whether or not they're going to be there with us, they have a lot to teach us. They're going to be a part of our training, right? We have weeks of active training. They're going to be in the trainings with us. How have they approached what's worked before? What are good approaches that might work? And so I don't have working at the state, I learned the idea of unsatisfactory answers, and this might be an unsatisfactory answer, but the answer is we're willing to go wherever we're called. The schools are particularly challenging because I have kids, and I recognize that there is nothing impersonal about a school. My child being at school is my heart, right? My heart is in a school, hopefully behaving herself, hopefully. But that's important to me, and I also recognize that we would be remiss if we didn't say that, we are a couple weeks removed from a horror, from an absolute scourge. And so we're also really committed to not being reactionary and making sure that the things we do are planful and meaningful and impactful and not symbolic, right? The symbolism already happened. That you guys did this, you invested your tax dollars in us. We need to do concrete, actual stuff. So we've had a chance to sit down for a second. We'll have more chances to sit down. I've had a chance to sit down with some other parents. Again, we want to have these conversations. Another group of parents is talking to us about, what happens when kids are at parties and they need to call for a ride. Are we able to do that? I don't have an answer to that yet, but I'm glad to have the conversation with them. I'm glad that people are thinking about harm reduction. I believe in harm reduction. And I think one thing you can stand assured of from all public safety is that we are committed to our kids, anything we can do for them to be successful, and we'll put our full weight behind that. Same with the seniors in this town. I know sometimes we talk about the senior center, we're also gonna help the seniors.
Can't forget about the seniors.
Yeah.
Did you have another question, ma'am? You said you had a couple.
Yeah, I also wanted to know, would particular communities that you see CRESS fitting into more, would they be able to have like a liaison? I know that from just hearing the news that worked in another community that they actually had a liaison for community safety with whatever entity that is doing that.
Say more.
Say-
I want to answer that, but I feel like there's a thing there I'm not getting yet.
No, it's just, you're the face of CRESS. We know that.
It's an okay face, that's all I got.
People working with you, but I don't have the sense of what the priorities are. Like I hear homelessness, I hear students, you know, who might be in some kind of crisis or whatever, mental health. But is there like an actual liaison to like a specific part of the community or a neighborhood?
There will be. So that's as we're thinking about the teams. So what I'll say is, up until last Thursday, CRESS was just me. So I am the face, and I was the only employee. So I gave myself a good review. I think I did a pretty good job with it. Nobody can really say otherwise. With Kat coming on, that has increased our capacity. When we hired folks, we were thoughtful and planful about having folks who represented segments of our community who we could then send back to work with those pieces of the community. So we'll have 4 teams, right? We'll have 8 responders working in teams of 2. They will have parts of the community that we expect them to have regular contact with, right? But we're also doing barbecues at the housing complexes, and there we're trying to identify, hey, what do you want us to do? We did one at Village Park last weekend, right? And we were able to talk to folks and, hey, do you want us to come have a community meeting? And what they said is, no, bring food. Feed us. Like, that's what we want. We want you to come, but they want serving. They want us to show up and address a need, right? Eating is a need for them. And there are not enough folks who come there just offering something. So when we go to Village Park, as much as the money allows us, it might be peanut butter and jelly sandwiches if money doesn't get too good, but that's what they wanted, right? That's how they want to engage with us. They wanted us to play with their kids. They wanted us to be part of their joy. They wanted us to show up other than the bad times, because they know we're going to come during the bad times. What they expect of us is that we're going to be there during the good too. When we go and meet with communities, we're asking them that. We went to Olympia. When we went there, we asked them, what do they want? Hey, could somebody come work in the community garden with us every once in a while? That would be helpful, right? They don't have a lot of young bodies over there in the community garden. That's something we can do. That idea of how can we address a need, what does that community need, and what would be a good contact point, right? That is different for different communities. So we're asking folks, your community, tell us, right? What I'd like to do is feed your community, ask them how they want us to show up, and show up that way, as much as possible, right? With the caveat that we're gonna show up during hard times, and hard times are gonna be really around one person, and being willing to have those conversations afterwards. So the answer is specific to those communities, and we're gonna do events at places and be in those spaces and ask those questions. Because that's the good part. I don't have to make up what this community wants. This community has no problem telling me what it wants. I like that. I came here for that. That was a great question. I'm sorry. I asked you to say more. I was trying to figure it out. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question about veterans.
Yes, sir.
I think most of us have read about how there's a very high suicide rate among veterans. And I also know that a lot of veterans who are discharged have a tremendous amount of difficulty getting integrated into their community. They're used to the military community that they had, and they come back here and they can't operate very well. It's a huge problem. I also know that there's a lot of vets among our homeless community. And there's also, I'm sure you may have heard about this, but there's a veterans court which tries to deal with criminals who, you know, or they're men or women who are vets who have difficulties with the law, and a lot of their problems come from their PTSD. And so I'm wondering, first of all, you need to be able to identify people with problems if they're veterans right off the bat. And then you can start integrating with a system which is trying to help veterans out who have these specific problems that other people don't have with the kind of traumas that they've gone through. And the only other question I have is that the guy named Steve Connor, whom you may know,
Love Steve.
Who's a veterans agent here in this area. He's a great guy, and I hope you can talk with him more about this.
Me and Steve have been on the network and homelessness
Okay,
steering committee
okay.
for like 3
I'm
years.
I'm really glad to hear that.
I like his haircut now, he's looking pretty sharp. But so that might, I actually think that's probably a question for you to start on, because military service is something that our PD carries with it too.
So we have a crisis intervention team.
I'm sorry?
We have a crisis intervention team.
Uh-huh.
And what that team does is they regularly visit with folks that the police department have dealt with, whether in a mental illness capacity or homelessness. And we're just there for a resource for them. And we have identified a lot of them as veterans, but many of our officers are veterans as well, so they make that connection, which is fantastic. But I think your point is excellent in terms of formalizing something a little bit deeper than that. So that's something that's a great suggestion, and that's why I'm glad all you folks are here, because you bring the ideas. So now that you brought that up, that's something for me to pitch to our CIT.
Okay, a lot of times what veterans need is they need someone to talk to.
Absolutely,
You
absolutely.
know, a lot of times they can't talk to anybody but another veteran,
You're right.
because they can't relate to the issues. Some of the stuff that they've had is so traumatic.
Absolutely.
They can't even talk to civilians about it. They don't know how.
So that's one of the things when we think about what CRESS can be best at the beginning, is listening. Is giving people a space to be heard. Right? Because it's not just about someone sitting next to you, right? It's about feeling like your words have an impact. That person is taking in what you're saying and trying to put it into their own context. I have not served. That is not a part of my life. I think one of these weird things that happened over the last 2 years would feel like the Twilight Zone. So I often have to go like, I don't know if it was like this in 2019, but is this idea that if you want progress, you're not patriotic. That if you want things to be better, the vets I've met in this community, and a lot of them have been homeless, are selfless people. They want to do better, and they have pride. And one of the things that human service agencies have failed at, and I would say this as someone who was in management at human service agencies, so at a time in my life I was a part of that failure. I try not to point fingers that don't point back at me. Is honoring the fact that it hurts. Like it hurts, right? In that when you need help, the last thing you need to do is be made to dance for it, right? Is to be, have someone film you on the worst day of your life. To have someone take something from you, make you do another piece of paperwork so someone will listen to you, make you go to another appointment, show up to another place, do another thing. One of the things I struggle with working in the mental health system, and vets come through that system routinely and regularly, right? Is that if you've never gone through it, what happens is you have to call an intake number. And you have to tell them all about the hard things that happen to you. They're gonna ask you like routinely, have you experienced sexual trauma, physical trauma, family trauma, incest, substance abuse? And you're gonna tell them, right? Because you want help. And they're gonna hang up the phone and tell you to call back and tell another person all those same things. And then if you get accepted into an agency, you're gonna do an intake meeting and you're gonna tell those things again. And what happens is, those folks aren't listening, right? They're just writing it down to see if you fit into a box that they can help. And as the person doing all that talking, every one of those is recounting the worst things that have ever happened to you in a rapid fire machine gun kind of setting. And what would it be like if we didn't do that? What would it be like if we just asked you what's happening for you right now? And then we were able to spend enough time with you to learn about you as you were able to trust us. One of the things I feel really strongly about is CRESS isn't asking you to trust us. We're gonna be trustworthy. We're asking you to watch us, right? We're not gonna tell people to give us all their trauma stuff. People are gonna learn how to, you walk into a room full of people, most of them have some trauma. That's what being trauma informed means. It doesn't mean making them list the worst days of their life every day. It means knowing that people have had hard lives. Even people who maybe on the surface don't look like they have. Treating folks the way you think they want to be treated. Not just the way I want to be treated, right? How do they want to be treated? What does that mean culturally? What does it mean for them? We got hard work to do. That sounds easy to say. That's not easy to do. And that's why we have such intense training, because this is hard stuff. And again, going back to my first point of work that was dumped into law enforcement's lap, they gotta keep taking calls. They gotta keep taking calls. So they don't have the time to come back to everybody every day and do that work. And so that's one of the things that we're really gonna be a force multiplier, right? To be able to help those folks communicate to the PD. Hey, this is what's helpful for me. When things don't feel good, this is what's helpful for me. And this is where I may get into a space where things are out of control, right? And this is what's been helpful there. And that's why the partnership matters, right? That's why us being able to do our work and them being able to do their work, not siloed off from each other, means something. Yes.
I'm trying to get a feel for what problem is being solved by the creation of CRESS, and it seems like it was coming out of particularly African American communities saying we want to feel more a sense of trust in our public safety response, and so like that was one source of saying we need this alternate response. And then there were also a lot of other issues that people said, oh, we shouldn't be sending a person with a gun to a mental health crisis if there's not that sometimes that can escalate an issue. Like, there's this different way of responding to mental health crises. But that seems like I just wonder, when you go through the 911 calls, how you say, this is CRESS, this is police, this is what mobile crisis units through DMH would be dealing with. How do you do that?
So I think, to answer your question, we have our dispatch center. Dispatches not only for the police, but also for fire and EMS as well. So when they take a call, they have to gather the information, and they kind of make a determination. There are certain protocols that they have to follow to make a determination as to who they're going to send. So now, with the CRESS program being there, that's an added agency for them to be able to ferry a call out. The challenge with that is determining, what type of call is it exactly? One of the biggest problems or one of the biggest hurdles that we faced together was the element of safety. A lot of calls that come in, may come in as some type of trespass or disturbance. And when officers get there, through our experience, it's never what the caller says it is. A lot of times it's a passerby who has the perception of one thing, and by the time the officers go there to investigate it, it turns out to be something else. And what happens is, when the call goes out, it's coded. When I say coded, it's a category. So for example, a noise complaint. So if an officer responds to, let's say your neighbors, you hear them yelling or screaming or whatnot, and you call in a noise complaint. A lot of times we'll go there, and it could be kids playing video games. It could be a domestic in progress. So the problem with it is, if we were to send CRESS right off the bat without having proper information, we don't want them in danger. We don't want to be in danger as well. So that's why it was kind of essential to have this type of collaboration, to try and figure out what type of calls would certainly go to CRESS and what type of calls would go to the police department. Once CRESS starts kind of immersing themselves into the community, a lot of times, certainly with the homeless population and mental health calls, it's usually the same players, the same people we deal with over and over again. So we get to know them on a personal level. So when they are in crisis, we kind of have an idea of what they're all about. Are they dangerous? What's our past experience with them? And so certainly with certain calls, we're going to be able to identify right away, okay, this should go to CRESS and there's no safety issue. But if there is a safety issue, we talked about a potential of a parallel response. So we kind of categorize that differently than a co-response. Co-response means it's automatic, where a police officer and a CRESS member go to the scene together. Parallel response is more like, okay, we both go to the scene and kind of figure out what's going on and make a determination who's going to take that call.
The other part of your question I hear is how do we aspire to answer that kind of racial justice question? And hey, I am a black man in America. I know what it's like to have someone look at me and see crime and not a human service nerd, right? I know what that looks like. And so we're having real conversations with those communities, with the folks who are concerned when we go to these apartment complexes. And often what folks are saying isn't that they don't want to call the police, they want to feel safe when they call them. And how can we help to build trust between agencies? How can we help to, what would it be like for them to meet a cop outside of that thing with us there? What would it be like for them to feel like the things they see on TV aren't reflected in their community, whether or not they're true or not, right? We're all watching that thing. And I sometimes think that's why the George Floyd video was so impactful, is policing is a universal experience in this country, right? And whether it looks one way or the other, like, all of us know what it's like to see someone there, see the cop behind your car and go, man, if I did something wrong, I hope I get away with it, and if I didn't, I hope they didn't see something. Right?
I feel the same way.
we all know what that pressure is like, right? And we live in such a pressure-packed place, and the truth is, it doesn't have to be like that. There are parts of this world where police are not perceived that way, and my suggestion is we have to figure out how to talk locally about these things, and then participate globally, right? There are parts of this area that need real advocacy for police reform, right? Hey, they're not that far, let's get in our cars and go. That used to happen here, right? I remember I was the president of the board at Arise for Social Justice, and just about every 3 months we'd run out of money, and what would we do? We'd get in our cars and we'd drive up to Amherst, and someone would write a check and we'd keep going. That was not a service that served this community, but this community had ownership over it, right? Because they knew that community couldn't afford it for themselves. Like, how do we not just solve this problem for ourselves, but be good neighbors? How do we teach other folks how to do this? And for folks who are concerned, hey, I get it. I had to have that conversation with my kids, right? My daughters live in New York City. My daughter got stopped at a bodega. Someone accused her of stealing something. She knew what to do because I had the conversation with her, right? Hey, you can hope that person's reasonable, right? I think the odds in this town that a reasonable officer are gonna show up are pretty good, right? But everybody has bad days, and so you need to follow things. And how do we have those conversations about when is the right time to advocate for yourself versus when is the right time to keep yourself safe? Period, right? Period, without having to know everyone, with just how do you interact with the criminal justice system in a way that feels fair, but also allows you to move through it, right? And the answer to that question, I think, isn't to go into separate corners and pull each other apart, but to sit at a table and say, this is what I'm concerned about. What do I need to do to not be concerned about it? And what can you do to make me not be concerned about it? And that's what we're committed to, right? What you won't hear from us is, oh man, that would be better if the PD did it a different way, because that would be a disservice to this community. If there's an issue, we're gonna go knock on their door, we're gonna all sit at a table, and believe it or not, there's gonna come a day where you go over to them and you say, hey, those CRESS guys are doing it this way, how do we get them to do it this way? And Gabe's gonna come knock on our doors and we're gonna sit at a table and get it right. That's just gotta be true. And this is a small town, and that's the history of this town, right? The tablets are not that far from us. You know, this is a town that answers the call. And so that's what we're doing. And again, it's art. On day one, we're gonna go low and slow. These responders are just gonna be coming out of training. My responsibility is the same as Chief Livingstone's, the same as Chief Nelson's, to get my folks home safe every night, and to get the folks they interact with home safe every night. And so that's gonna mean we're gonna give them a chance to earn more, right? We're gonna put them into situations where they can show their training and show that they can handle a more stressful. We are not building this for a year from now. You know, I'm building this so in 10 years, CRESS is a standalone thing, and I hope I'm still here for it. But if I'm not, CRESS will be. That's how you build institutions. So the thing is, we're going to start slow because we're not building for FY23. We're building for FY33. And that means that we need to make sure the next step is thoughtful and planned, and that they have our back, and the fire department has our back, and you have our back, and then we'll take that step. Then we'll settle, we'll make sure it was the right one, and we'll configure for the next one. this is going faster than anything has ever gone, and if I do my job right, it's going to slow down at points. And that may not feel good, but my job is to make sure these responders have the right training. And if they don't, if I feel like they don't have the training, I will pull them, and we'll do the right training, because we're building an institution, right? And you do what you're trained. If the training wasn't good, we'll stop. We'll do the right training, and that's tricky stuff, because we are moving so fast. I feel like we're on a roller coaster now, and you might be getting used to this speed, and you shouldn't. You shouldn't, because it won't always be this fast. But yeah, we're Amherst. We're going to do it the Amherst way. Any other questions? All right. No, I'm just kidding.
So, you mentioned the training starting soon, and I just wanted to, I know you don't have all the details, but do you know for, going to like the first week, my mom's a teacher, so I'll call them lesson plans. Do you have any idea of like the things you want to focus on first and foremost, what you want to start training with?
Yeah. So important is to get them used to being around the other public safety agencies. So the first day they'll be in this building, they'll swear in, they'll get pins. We wanted this to look like public safety. So what you'll see is a public safety onboarding ceremony, because that matters. And then we'll do HR orientation, all the stuff you have to do when you start a new job, the not fun stuff, but if you want health insurance, it's important, I hear. Then the first day we'll take them over to the PD. They'll meet those folks, they'll meet their leadership team, they'll orient to who's who over there, what their procedures are. They'll go up to dispatch, they'll see our dispatch center, they'll look those folks, they'll go to the fire department up here. I don't know if we'll get to the north one, but we'll at least be right here with Chief Nelson, and they'll look at his leadership team and start to get used to being around these folks. The first week of training is from the Wildflower Alliance. It was recommended in the LEAP report. I don't know if you've read it, but I really like the Bible. The LEAP report recommended them for 2 reasons. They're a mental health provider that has a focus on equity. So they do anti-racism trainings, trans allyship, LGBTQ allyship. They'll be our first training to orient them to the fact that trauma-informed, person-centered care is not just a nice, fuzzy way of doing things, but it's evidence-based. They're contracted by Australia, Vermont, Maine, Pennsylvania. We just happen to be lucky enough to have them in our backyard. Then we're going to go into motivational interviewing, which is a really kind of important mental health training based on being curious about the experience of others. We have nonviolent communication, really understanding the way you posture and the way you bring energy into a room. De-escalation doesn't start at the point of the conflict, it starts at the introduction. That's important to us. We have CRG, Conflict Resolution Group, who works with the Springfield courts. When people have done things wrong in this community, how do we bring them back? How do we help folks to atone for their wrongs? How do we help them to come back to being full members of this community, even when they've done hard things? We're going to learn that. We're also going to learn de-escalation techniques from them. And then me and Kat are going to put together lots of other trainings. How do you serve this town? What's the history of this place? What's the organizational stuff? Then we're going to do a lot of drilling, because that's what public safety looks like, the kind of boring stuff of when you make a dispatch call, what are the right things to say? How do you signal you're in a challenge? It's a lot of, we have the homeless training. We're using the pre-treatment guide from Jay Levy, also an Amherst resident. I think about this all the time. Me and Kat will be on the call tomorrow for about 6 hours talking about this. Training is really important. But the main thing is, we're also going to be getting coaching from those trainers to make sure that we take those principles and codify them into policy, so that we don't just train people, but we give them the tools to do them. And we'll be having the PD and the fire department with us along with those trainings, so they understand why we're approaching things from the way we are. We think about training a lot, and actually the LEAP report, which you can get off the town website, has a real roadmap to training, which we've adopted because it works. They set out a similar roadmap in Akron, Ohio, and I talk to those folks pretty regularly, and their LEAP report has served them well, so I'm going to trust our founding documents until they don't. Sorry, that was a question I think about all the time. I wake up thinking about training these days. I hope that's not always true. Any other questions? Did we answer them all? Oh, okay. I'm just kidding. I'm sure it's great.
Are you going to have a staff in the different languages? Because
Yes.
we have a many members of this community are unknown the English speakers. I work here in the building at the health center. And what is the way that we, like an agency, can work with CRESS? I am a community health worker since we opened here 4 years ago. And really, the first support, the Hispanic community special, they have here in Amherst, it really is us. When they don't know how to do something, sometimes they just bring me their letter because they don't know how to read their mail. So how are you going to work with these vulnerable population that is no English speakers, that they are not native here, that they don't have immigrant regular status in many cases? How that will work with you?
So I just want to say that's something you should expect me to figure out how to be pretty good at. I'm from Holyoke, so I grew up in Lyman Terrace, Jarvis, and projects in which most of the folks there were from Puerto Rico. I think we do that by having a bicultural, bilingual team. It's not just about understanding the language, but understanding the cultural. And the places people come from are beautiful places that have rich histories. Not just seeing culture is different, but it's rich, right? It's valuable and important. We'll use translator services. We'll figure out whatever we need to do. We'll be patient with folks. We'll partner with you. The question on that, I met with the leadership down there last week. We'll continue to meet as we start to pop open and provide those resources, but we have you. And so we'll partner with you, right? You're somebody who's already working with those folks, so you show us how to do it, right? You're gonna be a part of you're a part of this community, you're gonna be a part of our team, and help us meet them. But what I know is that, particularly in the Puerto Rican community, the trauma they've gone through the last decade is immeasurable. It's immeasurable, right?
Yeah, but I am talking really, and not just of Puerto Rican, Salvadorian.
Mm-hmm.
We have a huge Salvadorian, Ecuadorian community here because, and they are in even worse position because they don't have the legal status that Puerto Rican community has. So we are talking about a very mixed situation, and it's not, and Salvadorian, the majority of them came here in a very poor conditions, not in a plane, in very bad conditions, and they have a lot of trauma, and they are very scared. They can't drive. They barely go outside of their own community because they don't speak English. So that population has to be treated in a different way than others.
That's true for every community, right? Every community has particular things. So what I'll say when we were hiring the team is we valued lived experience, not just mental health or homelessness, but where people came from in the world, what their cultures were. We have a diverse team, as diverse as this community. So the idea of person-centered is to go into situations without kind of saying one size fits all, right? The way that I approach the situation is gonna work, but instead being kind of loose enough to ask someone what's meaningful for them. Early in my career, I worked with a lot of families from Africa in Springfield, and it was eye-opening, right? I remember going into a family, they ate on the floor out of a communal bowl, and someone on my team wanted to call DCF. And for their perspective, where they were from in the world, I understood. But actually what we were seeing was a family unit that worked, a family unit that was close, a family unit that was compassionate. I don't know what I don't know. And so being curious about folks, asking the folks who are in their communities, being willing to go to wherever their community meets. So right now we've really been meeting people in the institutions they go to, but glad to go to churches, glad to go to communities where people are and listen and learn. And understand that I'm not gonna understand everything. The other piece is, we're gonna be hiring. I hope not, but unless I'm the luckiest man in the world, everyone on my team is not gonna stay there forever. And so how do we get people from those communities to see themselves as CRESS responders? How do we get those folks to join in with us? When we put together, there's a CSSJC. Ooh, I got it. It only took once. There are working groups in this town that are gonna hold us to account. I would love to have folks from those communities join those groups. To see the way that local government is the closest government is to you, right? It's the most impact you can have on government. So I ask you to join us in how do we have those folks come and have a voice at the table with us and teach us how to be supportive of them. And the great part is, I think the PD wants to hear from those folks how they can be supportive, and your elected officials in this room also want to hear from those folks. How do we bring them into the fold in a different way? And so if you have some folks that we could talk to, like, let's make sure I get you my card afterwards, and let's set up a time to meet with those folks in whatever way makes sense. Whether that's at a kitchen table, church, the commons, wherever they want to be, we'll show up for them. And I don't just speak for me. I can certainly grab someone from the PD, I can grab someone from the fire department, whoever they want there. We can work to bring those folks to the table. But it seems like you know something I don't know yet, and I hope you'll teach me.
I don't know if I know
No,
something.
don't get home. No. You said something in there. We're gonna go get coffee. Because you're passionate. But here's the thing. You're passionate about those folks, right?
Absolutely, because I am the person for them that I wish to have when I came here. So I become that person because I am living in this country just for 6 years. And sorry.
Don't apologize.
When I came here, I didn't speak English. I didn't have friends. I didn't have anything here or community. So I needed someone who support me, and I decided to become that person. That's why I'm here right now. And the health center opened me a window to try to make visible that community. That is, it's unfortunately every time people thinking about minorities or vulnerable, just think in certain groups. But what happened with the rest? And I am talking about people from Cape Verde, from El Salvador, from Mexico, from countries that sometimes people don't think about certain groups like African American or special Puerto Rico, but what happened with the rest? And I am from Venezuela. Nobody say Venezuela, never. Nobody recognized me, really, because it's like, because we are few, of course, we are few, but we are not all the same. And I feel that when these kind of projects are created, put all of us in the same pot and just mix, and the solutions work for everyone the same, like a one side. And nobody that is not how it works.
Can I take another shot at your question?
Yeah.
You asked me how I'm going to work with those communities. I want to work with you.
I'm okay, I'm totally fine.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Like what you did there is really important, right? You showed us a soft spot. You showed us something that happened to you that shouldn't have happened, right? It shouldn't have happened, right? This country, there's an American dream. It isn't being lonely when you get here. And part of what happens is we get into this like, well, this community needs this, but here's the reality. That story you told is the story of how folks come here, right? It's the story of feeling ignored in a place you love, in a place you worked hard to get to, in a place that doesn't always see you. And so, like, I don't have an answer for what you're saying, but I think you have us closer to an answer than I'm gonna get us. And so what I want to do is schedule some time with you to learn that and appreciate your passion. And to know that, like, in my mind, and I know in the PD's mind, this isn't some ranking contest, right? This isn't about how do we solve problems we are committed to public safety in Amherst. However you got here, you're here. You're here. You're with us now. And so I want to see all those communities. If we don't get it right, and I promise you there will be times where we don't, do this. Tell us that there's a better way. Demand more of us, right? I feel charged up. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. Thank you.
So if I could just add to that, when I listen to your story, I think about my family, and I think about my mom and my folks when we first came to this country. English is my third language. When I came to this country, I spoke Chinese, a little bit of Spanish, and my family spent time in Brazil, so there was some Portuguese in there as well. So, I certainly recognize and sympathize with the struggle that you're talking about. And when I think about all the people that helped my mom and my dad come along to help me to get to where I am today, it couldn't have happened if it wasn't for other folks pitching in and helping. And I understand what you're saying, that sometimes it's difficult to find those resources. Just to look at a document, for example, what does it say? Somebody to explain you certain things.
14-day notice to quit.
Right. And, unfortunately, we do have an open door at the police department, but I do understand that there's barriers, in terms of, there's probably a lot of fear. That's something we're trying to eliminate, trying to open these doors to allow the public to not fear us. If you have a problem, come and see us. If we can't solve it for you, we'll try and find an avenue for you. We'll try and find resources. So for example, if you had a friend who doesn't understand, who's trying to get a driver's license, they don't understand the forms or whatnot, come on into the police department. We will help them out with it. We'll start from there. Again, if we don't have an answer right away, we'll try and find a resource, somebody that can help that person out.
I got your back.
Thank
We
you.
got your back. That's what we can commit to.
Yeah, really, I'm starting here, finding a way to get the license
Oh,
or.
we're gonna come to you. You don't gotta worry about that. After this, we're gonna come
apply
find you.
whatever, and really, it's a hard
Yeah.
part, because
Yeah.
the system is so complex.
Extremely.
Even
Extremely.
for people from here, imagine for a foreign. So, I mean,
It's funny you say that. My daughter, she just got her driver's permit, she's 16, and my wife was complaining to me all the hurdles that she had to jump through just to get a driver's permit. What a pain in the neck it was. So I understand.
I recognize we've gone over time. Thank you guys for not all leaving in droves. But this is what we're hoping to do, right? Is to have these sort of conversations, and hard conversations, right? That doesn't feel good to think that this thing is happening in town and not everybody feels involved. Because I want everybody to feel like a part of this. This is magic, right? You don't always get magic, and that's hard to hear. It hurts to hear you say that, right? My first response is to go, you're wrong. You're wrong. How could they have not met me? I've been everywhere. But you're right. So help us figure out how to meet those folks. And if there are communities that feel left out, help us. Because we're always going to be limited by what's in front of us. And like what folks saw there is what we can be at our absolute best. Is to hear and to commit to doing something different. That's what you can expect from public safety. So I think we can, please eat some snacks before you go. Kaylee did a great job getting them. They're good snacks.
We could,
yeah.
just, I think, you could call yourself community responders for caring and trust. That's really what you're saying. And yeah, that's great. I mean, it's the idea that public agencies don't have to be faceless.
Absolutely.
Well, like 42 of them, there's only going to be 10 of us. Just know us.
Thank you.
We'll come do this again. Maybe when it's not so beautiful outside. Maybe we'll get a rainy day for you. Thank you all for coming. It's always meaningful to me that Amherst shows up for these things. We'll be fine as long as we keep talking. I think that's the key. As long as we keep this conversation going, we're in the right direction. Thank you all for coming.